You're listening to Street Life, a podcast about street photography with John ST and Mark Davidson.
You're listening to Street Life. I'm Mark Davidson, a street photographer from Melbourne, Australia. And with me, as always, the man who puts the hassle in Hasselblad, my mate John ST. How you doing?
I'm doing really well, thanks, Mark. So now you're lining me up with Leica. Now it's Hasselblad.
Just trying to get you some sponsorship opportunities.
It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. But thank you so much for looking after my well-being and bank balance, Mark. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome, mate. You're back in the world of work again, John. Can we? You've got a job.
Don't make it sound like I was like unemployable, Mark. It was. I had 18 months off through choice, and now I'm back having to work for a living.
How's it going?
And I'm loving it, Mark. I love it. I really do. I love working for a living. No, it's great. Honestly, it's good to be back and using my brain again. 18 months was a great break, but so I'm back working in the education system.
Well, that's less shooting though, surely?
Yeah, it is, but I've got about 18 gig worth of
photos to go through. 18
terabytes worth of images to go through.
Kidding.
So
You do not.
Yeah. No, not 18. I think it's about 6.
Jesus.
So I think I've got enough to keep me going for a little while, Mark.
Well,
a little while.
Sounds like it, yes.
How about you? What's been going on in your world?
Well, I just missed your exhibition. You had an exhibition in Sydney, Rosu, which I couldn't make it up to, unfortunately, but it looked amazing. You and our mutual friend Adrian and Perry looked great.
Ad Tamo. Yeah, it was good. I love the way you just batted that straight across the net, Mark, right back at me. Yes, it was. Rosu AU Volume 2. It was a guerrilla-style exhibition in a side street, and it was great. Mm-hmm. And it was. We were a bit worried that the police were going to shut us down, but thankfully
they obviously... Like, you didn't have permission or anything. Oh, that's awesome.
No, it was proper Rosu type thing. So,
fantastic.
Obviously they had a lot more drunks to contend with that night than us.
Beautiful.
So it went really well. It went exceptionally well. And it was really nice just to see your images that big up on the wall. And,
of course, yeah.
And lots of people who were walking past actually stopped to look at it, which was great.
Magnificent.
It was really good. Yeah, it was all right. I think if Perry and the team continue it, I think it'll be a growing thing and it'll attract more people. I think it's very interesting. It's free. There's not many things in Sydney that are free, people. So if you ever see it come along, we had a sax player there. It was good.
Yeah, I saw him.
And then we went for drinks afterwards, and it was good to catch up with Adrian. I hadn't seen him for over 18 months.
Yeah, nice.
And Monique and lots of other like-minded people. That's good. But Mark, I just want to touch on this, and I know you're going to cringe a bit. I think there's a few podcasts ago you said you were leaning towards my argument of not entering competitions again, Mark. And here we are, back again. Dave-O's winning everything. He's winning everything. Yeah. What happened to that, Mark? I'm not entering competitions anymore. I'm not entering.
Well, I got back from Hong Kong and I just thought I'd chuck some stuff in one of the in the Istanbul one. Yeah, well, very happy with the win. I was very pleased. And, my prize was a Sony, so you can have it if you want. I'll sell it to
you. Listen to our podcast.
I'll give you a good price for it, mate. Yeah.
Oh, my God. You couldn't pay me to take it. Anyway, that's great. Oh, you got a Sony. What'd you get? An A7 what? 4?
No, I don't know what it is. Something. Starts with an A. I can't remember. I should know. Sorry.
Another camera. Well, you know what, Mark? You live in Melbourne. There's plenty of trams there for you to shoot, so that's great, mate.
I'll become a Sony shooter. Oh,
you will, mate. That's great. Well, congratulations. I didn't realise you won something that expensive.
Thank you very much. No, it's very good. It's an awesome competition. Istanbul great place to shoot, obviously, and I just wanted to support what they're doing. So they run a great festival, and I was happy to walk away with the win.
A great prize that you've threatening to flog already. That's brilliant, mate. Well done.
Anyway,
that's great.
Enough about me. Our guest is joining us on the line. He's been very patient.
The Sony. Oh, my God, the Sony. Anyway, yes, we do. We have a wonderful guest with us today. We have Stephen Dupont, is an Australian photographer based in New South Wales. Stephen is one of Australia's most acclaimed photojournalists whose work focuses largely on the human condition, war, and the climate. In 2007, he was a recipient of the Eugene Smith Grant for Humanistic Photography and is working in and on Afghanistan. He has also won the Robert Capa Gold Medal and several World Press Photo Awards. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Stephen to the Street Life podcast. Thanks for joining us, Stephen.
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me.
Stephen, thank you so much for your time.
Mark as well.
Lovely to chat to you. Thank you. Your work is so inspirational, and you've had a long and distinguished career, Stephen. It's kind of hard to know where to start, but let me ask you, did you always want to be a photojournalist from a young age?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. I think pretty much since I left school. And I did the HSC. And then went traveling for a year and found photography while I was traveling. I think, it sort of, or it found me in a way. I mean, I had a camera, and I was just, taking travel shots along the way when I was 18, and I was sort of backpacking around the world, and wasn't sure what I was going to do, as a career. And I think, I just loved taking photographs so much. And I thought, well, shit, why not, try and make a career of it? Like I had nothing else in my mind of what I think at one point I wanted to be a sound engineer, then a filmmaker. I was really interested in horror films, special effects and all that kind of stuff as a young kid. But then photography really got into my soul in a way. I mean, I met some photographers, and I love what they were doing. I loved their lifestyle a lot. In fact, the lifestyle kind of, really encouraged me, just as much as the actual photography side of things. I just wanted that travel and that freedom to just go and explore the world and have fun. And photography was that window, that opening for me.
Stephen, I love that. Didn't tell us where you went. So was it sort of the traditional backpacking through Southeast Asia, or where'd you go?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I'm not that young, so I don't know how traditional it was when I went. I went in 1985 or something like that. I suppose, what did I do? I did an around the world ticket for a year, and I went to Japan.
Wow.
And then I went from Japan to Brazil.
Cool.
Why I took this route, I don't know. It was just part of the round the world ticket. And then from Brazil, I went up to London, and then all through Europe. And then from Europe, I went to India. Then I went to Nepal, and then I went to Thailand. Wow. And then I came home. And that was a year. Yeah. So, and backpacking the whole way, and, just living on the street and living in hostels, or having the time of my life, really. I mean, it was especially, going to a place like India for the first time as an 18-year-old was just mind blowing. I mean, I just was in complete culture shock, and at the same time, it was just visually mind blowing. So I guess that's when photography really hit me. When I was in India, I was like, wow, I've got to photograph this place. This is insane. It's like madness and mayhem and just the smells and the light and everything was just overwhelming, and it was a major influence on me. And in fact, India has become, or even through my whole life, it's the place that I keep going back to, I suppose, and have photographed a lot in India. I've seen a lot of India.
Do you still have some photos from that time?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. In fact, I remember my first, when I came home, and I built a little darkroom and taught myself to print. I remember printing a couple of these photographs from India and Nepal. They were kind of like portraits, I mean, I think there was like a sadhu and just a couple of kids in the Himalayas, and pretty basic kind of photos. But I liked them enough to want to print them. In fact, they became, I suppose, part of my first portfolio that I would take around to see if I could get work. Pretty much I was trying to be a photographer as soon as I got back from that trip. So, I have those pictures. So I guess they're the first photos I took.
So you said that you got inspired to become a photographer by people that you'd met along the way. What genre was it documentary style photography that you were doing? Because I can't imagine you doing travel photography, Stephen.
No, it wasn't travel. I would call it more documentary style photography. Well, in fact, when I was traveling, I think it was more, I would say borderline happy snaps, you know. I mean, they weren't that good. The pictures weren't very good, but you know, I met a National Geographic photographer in Japan. Who I can't remember the photographer, unfortunately. But it was a man, and the way he spoke about photography and the way he spoke about his working for National Geographic was just incredible. And it was sort of like, wow, I really would love to do that, you know. And he was sort of photographing temples in Kyoto and so forth. And then I met a wildlife photographer also for National Geographic in India while I was up at Corbett National Park, you know, looking for tigers. It's the place where you can find tigers, and this was this was at that time, I guess, the world's greatest tiger photographer. And again, I can't remember the person's name, unfortunately. But two kinds of photography that I'm not interested in, you know, but yet they were the photographers that kind of opened the door to photography, I guess. But my inspiration came from experiencing life and looking at the world. And by doing that, when I came back from that original trip, I started to look at books and started to look at photographers' works. And in fact, it was, you know, there were some very important photographers that inspired me more than anything. And that's what really got me interested in the kind of photography that I wanted to pursue, which is, I guess, predominantly documentary, photojournalism, and even street photography, you know.
And touching on that, I was going to say that's a big jump into going, like, what made you want to go into photojournalism and not initially like take the step in like street photography first? You know, that would have been like baby steps type thing.
Yeah.
That's true. It doesn't pay.
I don't know. They kind of blur with me because I feel like I agree. I've always classified myself as a street photographer. Whenever I'm on the street and I'm photographing, I'm only looking for candid moments, and that goes into the heart and soul of my photography generally, is that I don't set things up. I capture things that are happening, and that is at the heart of street photography, as you guys well know. So when I am on the street, then I'm a street photographer. But then if I'm making a photo essay for a magazine or I'm doing a project-based thing, then I guess it's more documentary, where the same principles I follow, except that, you know, there are times when you're doing a portrait, or, you know, there's some sort of semi-direction involved, or there's research, there's permissions, many things that are not a part of street photography. So, you know, I definitely work between the two worlds, and I'm very conscious in general just to really honor the moment, you know, in my photography.
So, Stephen, you spent a year traveling, you got bitten by the photography bug, you come back to Australia, presumably you don't have a job. So how did you go about getting into the industry?
Yeah. Wow. I mean, firstly, I went up to my mum and I said, "Mum, I know what I want to do." She said, "What do you want to do with your life?" And I said, "I want to be a photographer." She goes, "Well, will you make money?" And I said, "I hope so. I don't know." I said, and then I think somehow, and she used to remind me of this, she said, "You told me that you would be a millionaire by the time you were 30 years old." Oh. I don't remember ever telling her that. She did often bring that up. And I said that I would become a millionaire through photography. Well, obviously that never happened. Photography was never something that made me much money. And in fact, it brings up a kind of interesting philosophical thing for me, because, you know, I actually didn't become a photographer to make money at all. You know, I actually became a photographer because I love photography first and foremost. And I wanted freedom. I wanted enough money to survive. I wanted enough money to buy a camera and enough money to travel and enough money just to be able to be a nomad and to have that kind of freedom where I didn't have to rely on an income. I didn't have to work staff for anyone. I could be my own boss. And in fact, I've declined every job that's been offered to me in terms of a staff job. I've kept true to my my original dream, which was to be a freelance photographer and only ever be a freelance photographer. And I've struggled, and I've worked my way up the ladder. So when I first started, I was looking for work. I think the first photographer I met in Australia was a guy called Stuart Davidson. That name probably doesn't ring a bell, but he was a big time Good Weekend photographer back then, about 1985, 86. Really good photographer. Actually came from my world, is in where I grew up in the western suburbs. Stuart came from there, and he knew my brother. And so I had this connection. And so he introduced me to Stuart, and then Stuart kind of got me started. And he said, look, the best way to do it is to, he said, go and photograph, just go out and photograph, make a portfolio, and then go and see people, like see the magazines, see the newspapers and so forth. So that's kind of how it started. And he asked me what I was interested in. I said, look, I love music and I love going to see bands. So he said, go photograph bands. He said, that will teach you so much about photography, because it'll teach you about lighting. It'll put you in the worst lighting conditions imaginable. You'll have to really work really hard to make photographs. You'll need to work on capturing those moments of on stage. So that discipline and that training and that self-training of mine that started off in rock and roll photography was where it all started. And it was an incredible training ground. And I thank Stuart for that. Sadly, he's not around anymore. He passed away quite a while ago. But from there, I moved to Sydney, and I started to go and meet photographers, and I was assisting fashion photographers, corporate photographers, advertising. Of course, I talked my way into becoming an assistant, saying, I'm incredibly experienced and I know about lighting and I can do this and I can do that. I knew nothing about anything, but I had the gift of the gab, and I managed to get in, actually work for some very well-known fashion and corporate photographers. And I learned along the way. I sort of just trained myself, and I watched and learned, and that's what started it in terms of, building up a little bit of income. But in my heart, my heart was in documentary photography, and my heart was in following that, I guess, that Magnum school of photography, which, inspired me. And a lot of the photographers from Magnum were the people that I was interested in and loved their work. So I was really set on becoming that kind of photographer, but I knew I had to take the steps. And then it took many years before I really got to the point where I went out and I photographed my first, I guess, serious photo essay, which was 2 months in a hospital in the western suburbs of Sydney, in a casualty ward and hospital, where I was actually inspired by Eugene Richards. He did a great book called The Gun and Knife Club. Right. Which is set in New York City, where he just covered an accident and emergency ward. And that was really inspiring. And so I kind of did the same thing. Wow. That was the first published photo essay I had ever published in Australia. And I'm still quite proud of those pictures, some of them anyway. One of the pictures made the cover of the Good Weekend. Yeah. So that was kind of cool as a young up-and-coming photographer.
And were you pitching your own stories back then, or were you?
Yeah, pretty much everything. I mean, look, as a freelancer, you need an agency. So back then it was the world of agencies. It's not so much like that anymore. It's changed so much. But, I was with a Sydney agency called Sydney Freelance, actually. It was run by a French couple, Patrick and Sylvie Rivière. And in fact, Patrick Rivière was a really great press photographer, very much from the Gamma Sigma kind of school of French press photography. Really great, really fast. He taught me how to work really quickly and to cover news. And in particular, it was celebrity based mostly. So we were out running around, papping people and getting celebrity photos, which that's what the market wanted. And the agency, that's pretty much what they were dealing with. So and we were dealing with the French, we were working through Gamma and Sigma as well, and Capa and people like that. Patrick was also connected with Agents France Press, so he was doing stuff for them too. But that taught me a lot about the pressure that you have when you're on the street and you're photographing a news story, or chasing celebrities as it was back then. But and then from there, that sort of introduced me to the world of photo agencies. And I think I spent a year on a newspaper as a casual, which was the Australian. That was good training as well. Taught me a lot about printing in the darkroom, and then working on a daily, pressure, a daily kind of routine of getting photos to the desk, and the deadlines and so forth. And then after that, this probably sounds like a long time, but this is only like a few years, And then, by the time I'm sort of 24 or 25, I'm going off to cover the Vietnamese withdrawal from Cambodia. And that was for Playboy magazine. So that was kind of my first big overseas assignment. And it was very rock and roll, to get Playboy on board and to go over to, Vietnam, and to go to the place that I suppose, when I think of my great admirers, the people that I admire most are people like Don McCullen, who covered the Vietnam War. And so I was going back into Vietnam to sort of, well, obviously not the Vietnam War, but to get a sense of what Saigon was like, and these kind of places. So it was pretty exciting as a young person.
Can imagine.
So that was the Vietnam War. The withdrawal was your first taste of, I would say, war-torn conflict and things like that, Stephen. Is that correct?
Well, that wasn't conflict at all. That was purely a peaceful story. The troops were coming back from Vietnam. The Vietnamese troops were coming out of Cambodia. So since the end of the genocide in Cambodia, the Vietnamese were in control of Cambodia, but they had pulled out and to let Cambodia, become independent again. And it was a big deal. It was a big story. But what was interesting, it was the first time that Western media were allowed into Vietnam since the end of the Vietnam War in 1975. So the only press prior to us were Russians or North Koreans or Chinese or communist press. So we were the first, and it was a media frenzy. I mean, there were a lot of press photographers there, and including a lot of photographers that have obviously covered the Vietnam War as well. Tim Page and people like that were there. So it was interesting. But I suppose my first conflict was on the same trip, but it was a side trip up to the Burmese border where I went into Burma with the Karen National Liberation Front and saw a little bit of action up there, and just more about the kind of the scars of war as opposed to the action, just the scars on the people, on the Karen and the children and the refugees and things was really eye-opening. It was very powerful. But I kind of culminate the whole thing because it was all on the same trip. And I'm doing different stories. I'm doing a story for Playboy. I'm going up to do the Karen just for my own photo essay to try and sell it later. In fact, I sold some essays to the Australian newspaper when I got home. So, as a freelancer, you're constantly you're going out and you're just doing stuff because you're going to have to go back and try and get it published. I mean, there's no internet. There's no. This is like I'm bringing my films back, and I'm going to process and edit, and then try and place them in a magazine or a paper.
Just excuse my ignorance. How did you get dragged into the Burmese type thing? Like you said, you got dragged in by, how you just made it sound so casual. I was in Vietnam and I got dragged through. How did you get yourself into that situation, Stephen? Like what happened? Did you meet a bloke in a pub or what?
Yeah, I don't know. You just go with the flow, I suppose. I mean, I was with a mate of mine, Ben Bohane, who's a really good writer and also a photographer. And it was both our first story together. Ben was writing and I was photographing. And we were just adventurous, we just wanted, we were kind of adventurous, a little bit naive, maybe a little bit gung ho. And we wanted to make a name for ourselves, and we want to, have an adventure. And so we basically just took off, and I remember we had some contacts, and they got us to the border, and then the Karen picked us up and they took us over into Burma. So this is all illegal. I mean, this is all kind of crossing, with the rebels.
Yeah.
But we felt totally, welcomed, and, but it's amazing. Yeah. When I think back, it's like, you just put your trust in people you don't know, and you just hope for the best.
Yeah.
We had a few issues along the way where we nearly got robbed and this and that, and, scammed and things. But, you learn these things along the way. You learn street savvy kind of behavior, and you go with your gut. And that's sort of been my way, ever since, go with your gut feeling, and put trust in people that, you feel comfortable with, and and hope that that they're not going to kind of shoot you in the back.
literally.
Yeah.
Do you find that your guard is let down more when you're in situations overseas and, say, particularly at home or something like this? Like you're just willing to, like you said, go with the flow, whereas maybe if you're in Australia, go, hold on, I'm not going with that gangster type thing, you know what I mean? Or doesn't it matter for you?
Oh, look, I think now I'm much more in tune. I mean, with the experiences I've had, and
yes.
I'm much more sort of, street smart, and I think I do my research. I do my, I still go with my gut as well, but I think you always have to, and you have to appreciate and honor your fear when you go to these kinds of places, because fear is a wonderful natural ability to fight something if something goes wrong. And so, there are all these things that you take on board where you really just, it's part of life. It's part of just experience, really. And I think I've taken those experiences and really used them through different stages of my life, different wars, different scenarios, and even back home in Australia, like you said, I think it doesn't really leave you. I think I'm still the same person back here as I am when I'm traveling. I'm just dealing with different people and different spectrums, different sort of, adventures and different, scenarios. And
yes.
I don't know. It's an interesting question, but yeah.
Well, speaking of adventures, Stephen, you some of your most famous work is Afghanistan. I think you photographed in that country for about 20 years more, from the 90s right up until 2014. So what led you to Afghanistan, and tell us a little bit about your time photographing there?
Well, I was living in London at the time, so it's kind of early on in my career. So, when I kind of mentioned this agency in Sydney and this trip to Vietnam and Asia, soon after that, I was on a plane I went to New York, tried to find a photo agency there. So I was looking for an international agency now, and that didn't really work out. I spent a couple of months there, and I think someone had suggested I go to London and see this agent, and so I did, and ended up finding an agency in London and staying in London for the next 7 years. So, and in fact, London was my training ground in a way. I mean, Australia were baby steps, and they were just kind of like experimental and, a lot of learning but when you get to London, you're faced with the best in the world. I mean, you are up against everyone, and that's what I wanted. I needed that challenge. I needed that pressure, and I couldn't do it in Australia. So I had to go to London. I had to compete with the best in the world. So found an agency and then started to, again, I'm freelancing. So I'm going out and I'm making stories, and now I'm working for The Independent and The Guardian and The Times and people like that, and Afghanistan, because I'm researching all the time and looking for stories. The Bosnian War was kind of pretty tense then. It was going off at that particular time. This is 93. And So we were kind of in the middle of the Bosnian War, but the whole world was in Bosnia. And I was just like, I don't want to be in the media circus. I wanted to find my own place and my own conflict, I suppose. And when Afghanistan came my way, it was a story about refugees that were fleeing the country. And I remember reading the newspaper report. It was just like 100,000 refugees are fleeing Afghanistan into Tajikistan across the border, and they were Russian soldiers, like it was a Turkish shoot. They were just shooting them in the Amu Darya River as they were trying to flee their own war. So the civil war had erupted in Afghanistan. And the absurdity of this scenario and just the desperation of these refugees, and then just looking at the bigger story and the conflict of Afghanistan. This is just after the 10-year war with Russia. I just thought, wow, this is a really fascinating story and no one's reporting on it. So I was like, I'm going. So I flew out. I flew out to Pakistan, and I ended up talking my way on. So this would never happen now. I talked my way onto a United Nations flight from Islamabad, and they flew me into Mazar Sharif in the north, where the refugee crisis was. And I started with the refugee story, and then I ended up befriending people at Médecins Sans Frontières, which helped me. I was, basically disguised as one of their doctors, and they helped me get into Kabul, which was under incredible bombardment at the time. It was being rocketed and shelled, and there were 3 different factions fighting for control of the city. So it was a massive war, and I was one of the only photographers. Maybe there were a couple of others, like an AFP photographer, Reuters maybe, but there was no one there. And I thought, wow, this is an incredible story, and no one's talking about it yet. The world should know about it. And so I wanted to photograph and bring back stories from that conflict. And that started my obsession with Afghanistan. I mean, I fell in love with the place. I really, the people were really just beautiful, and the country is just so, epic and wild, and I mean, just and incredible to photograph in. So again, photography, is always a big part of it, and that's kind of where that started, back in '93, and probably that was the beginning of not the first major conflict, because I'd been covering a couple of conflicts in Africa before that. I'd been in Angola covering the Civil War, and I'd been in Somalia, and then I would go back and do more in Africa as well. So, but it was certainly the beginning of a long-term love affair with Afghanistan.
Stephen, you were given access to the Northern Alliance leader, I'm going to call him, because the press called him a warlord, and I'll ask you about that, and which often is a negative connotation to something, you know what I mean? Ahmed Shah Massoud, is that correct?
Ahmed Shah Massoud.
Yeah.
Ahmed Shah Massoud, yeah.
Yeah. Could you share with us how that all came about, and perhaps share your experience and story with that? Because I've seen some of your images, and they're amazing, but it's the way you've captured him that in a human element, that the connotation warlord, or the title warlord would sort of, it's not what you would anticipate when you see your images.
No, that's interesting. And look, Massoud was, I was very lucky, I mean, I was lucky because I was just given such incredible access that not many people were given. I think maybe the only other photographer in the world that had the kind of access that I had was Reza, who was with Massoud during the Russian war. But when Massoud, the thing is, I was working a lot with the French press, and so I managed to, I can't remember how it happened, but I managed to hook up with Le Figaro magazine in Paris, and that the writer, one of the main chief journalists there, wanted to go and do stories in Afghanistan, and he'd heard that I'd been there, and so we talked, and then he said, "Oh, look, why don't we go and do a story on Massoud?" This is like in '95 when Massoud was in Kabul and the then defense minister, and and so we did. We got the permission, and Masood invited us out for a profile piece for the magazine. He loved the French, Masood, so that was that helped. Masood studied in Paris. He spoke French, and he was really, the French were big supporters of him, and in fact looked up to him as more of a, you know, a kind of a war hero. You know, he was kind of a Che Guevara kind of guy. You know, and so my first time there was great. It was like really just fly on the wall. It's exactly how I like to work. And I never got to interfere with anything he was doing. It was purely observational and purely observational photography. And I loved that. And I think Masood really loved that too, because he was a very busy, very important person that didn't want to be bothered by anyone. I mean, the only thing that was the journalist would interview him and so forth. But I would just be left to follow him for days and days, weeks. It was incredible. And so I had this amazing body of work of everything from him, picking flowers in the garden to having an ice cream in the backyard, with one of his leaders, and then praying and then going out with the troops and, doing what a minister does and so forth. And that first trip and that photo essay on Masood led to the second trip, which was even more interesting, which was in 98. And so Masood invited Jean-Marie Montaly, was the journalist, invited him and myself back to do a second profile on him, on Masood, for the Le Figaro magazine. And again, we spent this time with him and got incredible access. This time, he's like in control of only 10% the country. He's fighting the Taliban, which have control of 90% of the country. So this is a time before 2001 and all of that, sort of the war on terror. So we're talking about Masood against, the Taliban. And so we're traveling around Badakhshan and the north and the Panjshir Valley. And again, this observational thing and really intimate access. And I wanted to show the human side of him. He was, what, you call him a warlord, you call him a resistance leader.
Yeah.
He's all of these things, depending on who you ask. I saw him as a human being, and I wanted to capture that. I didn't want to judge him. It's not my place to judge. So for me, it was really, how do I humanize this person?
Yeah.
And that was like photographing him at the dinner table. There's a shot I did where he's massaging his foot at the breakfast table, which I thought was really, really strange, but really beautiful. He's actually, if you look at the photo, you can see he's actually giving his foot a massage, and all of these really subtle moments, praying, people reacting to him like he's a god, just the kind of ecstasy of that people have for him, trying to capture that world. And that's my job. And as a photographer, that's what I was there to do. And I remember this wonderful moment when Masood's minder, like his assistant, the guy that's all, he's kind of second in charge kind of thing, who was always with us. I came up to him and I said, I asked him, I said, look, why is Masood giving? I was just curious, like, why am I getting such incredible access? Why is Masood allowing me to photograph all this stuff? And he turned around to me and he said, because Masood told me that he doesn't see you. It's like you're not there.
Interesting.
And it was a great compliment, because it was like, I'm the fly on the wall. I'm the guy who doesn't bother him, who doesn't ask him questions, who doesn't get in his way. And he said that he just leaves you to do your thing because he doesn't notice you anymore. And I thought that was really wonderful. Yeah. As a photographer, it's a great compliment coming from someone like that.
It is.
You hope for that kind of reaction, but it doesn't always come. People are always self-conscious or, Masood completely ignored me. And I think that's why the photographs are very authentic and they really express this real human side to him. So, I think I captured that side of Masood really well. It was one of my most, I think, strongest, more intimate portraits of certainly of a person.
I'd go as far as to say he didn't ignore you. I think he just felt ultimately comfortable with you and trusted you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, exactly. He trusted me. Yeah.
He trusted you.
No question.
Otherwise, yeah.
Yeah. He was interested in photography too. In fact, there was one time where he took my camera and he took some photographs with it. Just on the side kind of thing. But
yeah.
He had an interest in photography.
Stephen, this is so fascinating. I just love the daring do of, going to Afghanistan off your own steam and falling in love with the country and, getting this access to these amazing people. And so then 2001 happens, 9/11, the Americans come to Afghanistan. So tell us the difference between how it felt on the ground, in the 90s compared to in the 2000s.
Well, the 90s were really kind of free, and I was with the Afghans and I was with Masood a lot of the time. So it was a very different kind of period. It was kind of more dangerous in a way back in the 90s, just because it was very much the sides were quite blurred, and Kabul was very, very risky. There was a lot of fighting, a lot of checkpoints. You weren't sure who to trust. Mm. Yeah, there were many different factions, whereas when the Americans got involved, you're kind of with the Americans. And then if you're with the Americans, you're with the Afghans, they're with the Americans. It was a very different, it was definitely a lot safer in your sort of understanding of what side you're on. And there was quite a lot of protection. I mean, of course, anything can happen in war. You can get blown up by an IED or suicide bomber, and all of that stuff was coming into play, which wasn't back in the 90s. The 90s were just gun battles and rockets and planes dropping bombs and helicopter gunships and, all that kind of stuff. Whereas it was a more of a hidden enemy now with IEDs and landmines and all, and so, yeah, it was different. And a lot more red tape with the Americans and the Australians and the Brits and everyone else I embedded with. Because during that period, for me, it was about embedding a lot of the time. I mean, I did do quite a lot of stories outside of the embedding where I was sort of focusing on, say, the drugs, the opium. And, I did a really big story on heroin addiction with a writer friend of mine, Jacques Minache. And that became a book and a film and everything. And so, I was conscious of staying to the human story. I mean, with war, it's easy to get sucked into the bang bang and the kind of the fighting. And for me, I kept wanting to go away from that, and I kept wanting to go to the people, and I kept wanting to tell their story. So I think if you look at my book, Generation AK, it really shows in there that I've really focused on the Afghans, not so much on the fighting, but more on the, what happens as a result of war, what are the scars of war and the trauma of war. And I wanted to capture that in people, in the Afghans, to honor them in their struggle. I mean, it is about their struggle. And for me, that was always about that. And I was constantly being drawn to stories to capture that kind of humanity or that inhumanity.
So, Stephen, just touching on that, how the war changed and it became more of a guerrilla warfare type thing, and there was being new tactics employed with suicide bombers. In 2008, you actually caught in a tragic event with the suicide bomber where he blew himself up about 5 meters away from you. Now, I watched the report on you and yourself. You were recording yourself after it just happened. Amazingly so, how you managed to do this. And you asked yourself, forever the professional, you asked yourself while you were walking along, not knowing if you were actually severely injured or not, or whether it was just the adrenaline kicking through, why do you do this job? And I'm just wondering, did you ever find the answer, Stephen?
No one's ever asked me that. No, I haven't found the answer.
I don't want to turn a tragic moment into a horrific moment into a, but it's at that moment where you go, like, what the fuck am I doing this for? Like,
it's true. I think it was a momentary lapse of reasoning. I think I was heavily under the influence of adrenaline and shock, obviously. And so at that moment, I'm questioning that, why am I doing this? And I was really angry with the people who, blew them, the suicide and then being attacked by the Taliban. I was really pissed off. And also my colleague was badly injured, and I didn't know what state he was in. I didn't even know if he was alive. So I was kind of going through all of these mixed emotions, and I was really angry, and I was sort of, I guess I was just sort of venting my frustration of questioning that, why do I do this? And I think it was something that it's something I might have asked myself internally, but because I was filming myself, I was just expressing it to the camera. Because why I did it, I don't know. I think it was just a moment of just that's kind of how I was rolling with it, and I was just, maybe I had to have some sort of reassurance that if I could have a camera there, I could express myself better, and all of these things were going. I was processing a lot of shock stuff, and what had happened and all that kind of thing. But to answer your question, I don't think I've come up with an answer. I'm still doing it. So I haven't stopped doing it. I think I think you have found the answer if you're still doing it, Steve. You realize there's... Well, it's like you got to get back up on the horse. Like I think within about 4 months, I went back to Afghanistan after the bombing, and I did an embed with the Gurkhas, with the British Gurkhas. And that for me was, I pushed myself to do it because I was still a bit unstable from the suicide bombing, and I was like, but I did it, and I'm glad I did, because it really it helped me process that trauma and got me back, so to speak, on the horse. It got me back into the country that I loved, and the story that I wanted to honor and continue to photograph. I just won the Eugene Smith with my Afghanistan work, and I also felt the pressure to produce that work for the Eugene Smith Grant. So I didn't want to stop. I wanted to finish the work. And so by 2014, I'd gone back in 2009 and did the embed with the Marines, and then went back with the Australians, with the Australian War Memorial, actually. And then decided that was 20 years and I would do the book. So, I'm still doing it. It hasn't stopped me from, maybe I certainly don't want to, get myself blown up again, but it was quite an experience. Yeah.
Well, sometimes people have just got a calling, and maybe that's your calling, Stephen. And
maybe
you don't have a choice in the matter.
Yeah, well,
or maybe you do. I don't know.
We always have a choice. But,
I mean, devil's advocate there.
I think I have a family and stuff, so I'm less likely to take those kind of risks. So but yeah, look, it happens.
So just touching on that, because that's one of my questions that's perfectly lined up. Thanks, Stephen. Now, just spoken about what you want to do, and this is your passion. I would say it's your passion because you want to tell people about the tragedies in the world and share their stories, and so people have an understanding of what's going on. And that's great when it's just you, but how you're throwing yourself into some very dicey situations. I mean, for God's sake, you couldn't get any closer than being blown up than 5 meters away.
Yeah.
How does that impact on your family, and how do they feel about you going out and gripping the world by the what and going, I'm going to do this, and sayonara, babe, and I think is it right? You have a daughter as well, is that correct?
Yeah.
How difficult is that for you to do that?
Well,
to follow your
it's
passion,
difficult,
and also have the support of your family. How do they feel about it?
Well, it was easier when my daughter was younger. When she didn't quite understand. Although I remember this amazing moment when she was about 5 years old, and I was going to. It's not a war, but it was a terrible story. It was when the typhoon in the Philippines happened. Typhoon. Haiyan or Yolanda. It was like wiped out hundreds of thousands of people. It was a massive story. And I went over for the New Yorker magazine, and I remember going up to her and saying, "Oh, look, I've got to go and photograph this typhoon. It's killed a lot of people in the Philippines." I was trying to explain to this 5-year-old girl and what I was doing as a photographer and what it meant to me, and that it was really important that the world sees these photographs. And I'm working for this really great magazine called The New Yorker. And then my daughter just sort of looked at me and goes, her exact words were like, you're not, you don't care about any of that. All you want to do is go over and photograph dead people. Something along those lines, It's like she just read straight through me. It's like, you just want to go and photograph dead people. And it, how does that importance, reflect on me? It's kind of like, this is just about you wanting to go over and photograph dead people. It just sort of stunned me. It was quite a moment. I mean, not that's, yes, I did want to go and photo. That's kind of the reality of what you're getting yourself into with a tsunami. But, but it was coming from a 5-year-old. But now it's getting more difficult because she's 16 and, I mean, I struggled a little bit with going to Ukraine because she didn't want me to go, but I still went, and I think she understood. And I might have kind of mentioned that I wasn't going to cover any conflicts. So sometimes you got to lie a little bit, and tell a few stories in order to cross the hurdles.
Let the truth get in the way of a good story, Steve.
Yeah. But look, honestly, aside from that, a lot of the work that I'm doing these days are more project-based and more long-term stories, and they don't always, then they're not always war-related. I mean, I'm very much involved in the environment these days. I'm, which is another kind of war. I'm really in tune with trying to do stories that mean something to me personally. And in fact, it was my daughter who inspired me to do work around the environment, because it's her generation, of course, that are going to face this crisis more than anything. And so that inspired me to start looking at the planet and looking at, the earth and the problems that we're having with climate change and so forth. So she's been a great inspiration for that. But I'm multitasking, I'm doing lots of different things, I'm designing books for people. I'm making documentary films. I'm doing my own books. I'm doing a lot of archival projects. So I'm not always shooting these days. I'm doing a lot of editing, a lot of production, a lot of which, culminates from 30 years of photography. So it's a good time to do that as well. But yeah, like, right now with Israel and Gaza, of course I want to go. It's like, shit, what am I doing here? It's very hard. It's very frustrating. I mean, part of that problem is not so much my family. It's actually getting an assignment. It's really hard. Yeah. It's really hard to get an assignment these days. I mean, it's not like it was when I was, based in London and photographing around the world. Times have changed. And so, yes, I could go over there and just do my own thing, but this is the kind of story I think I'd want to have some backing.
Yeah. Sure. Stephen, I want to ask you about your current projects. I saw you work at the Ballarat International Photo Biennale, which was amazing. But just want to touch on something you said before. Your daughter said you like to go and photograph dead people. I remember you telling a story that you were embedded with the Marines in the US Army, and you did famously photograph some dead people, which led to a bit of a controversy. Can you tell us what happened there?
Well, that was a Taliban burning episode in 2005. So American soldiers had burnt the bodies of 2 dead Taliban combatants, and I was embedded with them, and I managed to capture that on video and also stills. I was photographing it and shooting video. It was just one of those moments I knew that as it was unfolding, it was so shocking and so confronting, and I just went with the flow of capturing it, which is why I shot video as well. It was kind of like I'd taken stills and I thought, I've got to capture video as well. This is something that I've never seen before. I didn't quite understand at the time how big it would be, but certainly when the story broke, which it was all over the world when it got released. I mean, it was a massive story, led to a lot of controversy, led to a lot of blowback on the American military. I mean, it changed U.S. military policy, which was a great thing. Yeah. So the repercussion of my photographs and the story and the video footage instigated a policy change. Yeah, it was one of those things that, comes once in your life. I mean, it was really, and that photograph of the burning bodies became quite iconic. I mean, the New York Times ran it, and it was nominated for a Pulitzer, and got a Robert Capa citation, and it got a lot of awards and recognition. But first and foremost, for me, it was that it was wrong. It was wrong what they were doing. No matter they're your enemy, but you don't burn them, and you don't. But it went beyond that, because they were using psychological operations to actually instigate a psyops tactic where they were sending off very slanderous, very aggressive commentary about the bodies burning, facing west towards Mecca and all that sort of thing. I don't know how much you know about the story, but it's quite involved. But essentially, it looked like a determined psychological operations event, and was certainly turned into that. And so for me to capture that and tell the world what was going on in terms of what the Americans did was really bad for them. I mean, it really didn't look good on the Americans. I mean, the Afghans were very, even like the Afghan government that was supporting the Americans there were literally people rioting in the streets in Jalalabad and in Pakistan. And this followed an episode where the Americans had put a Quran down the toilet, like a few months before this. The Americans were going through a pretty rough time with the Islamic world anyway. And then you had Abu Ghraib, so it was kind of like another, I wouldn't say nothing like Abu Ghraib in Iraq, but this was another sort of, thorn in the American military and in George Bush. And it was really like, I remember Donald Rumsfeld had come out and actually said some comments directly at this footage, which was was huge. And I had, the whole world's media were kind of like calling me up to do radio interviews. It was absolute. It was what do you call it? It was a on the internet. It was just a viral. It was a viral.
Viral.
It was viral, man. But it was viral in so many ways. But I wasn't. Yeah, it was hard because I knew I'd get these guys into trouble, and I really liked them. They were really good to me, and so I was quite torn with the story, but I couldn't hold back. I couldn't not show it. I had photographed it, and they had allowed me to do it. And so it is what it is. And that these were the results. So even though these guys got into trouble and they hated me for it, and I think for a few years after that, I couldn't embed because I was blacklisted from the American military. And it wasn't until 2009 when Obama became president that I tried again to embed, and then I was allowed. So new president,
Well, it's, Look, we live in a world now where we're bombarded by content, and there are so many things vying for our eyeballs all the time. And I know you've probably been asked this a million times, so don't forgive me, I'll ask it again. But do you think photos still have the power to change minds in this day and age?
Oh, I think so. I think certain photos do. I think sadly we're oversaturated. That is a problem, because there's a lot of great imagery, but we're just oversaturated with it. Like, look at Gaza right now. It's just an oversaturation of misery. We need to see it. There's no question. But if you talk about images that, have that impact and make changes, certainly, yes, absolutely. But it's hard to pinpoint, certain iconic photographic images within the context of the viral mass of stuff, if you know what I mean. I think I saw an image on Instagram that Patrick Whitty had put up of this woman who was cradling, her daughter, and it was a very Madonna-like kind of figure, and you didn't see any faces, you didn't see any blood. It was just this incredible sculptural image. and he was sort of comparing it to the great James Nachtwey picture in the Sahel, where the woman's holding the child in the white, it's very famous photograph. And so yeah, there are going to be iconic images, and they will have the power and do have the power. But it's just finding those within the context of the the quicksand of imagery, that's out there. Photography, I think, will always have that power. It's I became a photographer because of that. I became a photographer because I knew the power of what a still photograph can hold.
Stephen, we can talk to you about your work in Afghanistan for hours. It's absolutely incredibly fascinating, but I'm conscious time is against us. We've almost hit the hour mark, and I just want to ask you a couple of more questions about your other projects before we wrap up. So I went to the Ballarat Photo Biennale a couple of weeks ago. It's just wrapped up, and saw your Fucked Up Photos exhibition. So tell the listeners about that project, how it came about, and I believe there's a book in the works that people can pick up if they want to.
Yeah, there is, Mark. There is a book. When it's coming out, I'm not sure. It's been sitting with Steidl for a while, so I'm doing a book with Gerhardt. It'd be my second book with Steidl. He's notoriously slow, Gerhardt. So it could be. It's meant to be out now. I'm hoping it'll be out soon, though. I mean, it's ready to proof and then print. So could be next month, or it could be in the next 6 months. I'm not sure. But that's pretty exciting. I mean, it's a project that was very dear to my heart, and it came about during COVID, actually. While we were kind of in lockdowns and I couldn't really travel, I spent a lot of time down in the studio looking through my archive. I mean, most of my archive is analog. A lot of the stuff that I shoot is film. I mean, I shoot a lot of digital these days, but a big proportion of my archive and the work that I'm really proud of is often film based and personal. And as I was going through the archive and sorting things out, I was cataloging, and I thought, fuck, I've got to do something in COVID. I've got to make the most of it. And I started looking through all my contact sheets. Again, and some I hadn't seen in 20 years, or it's really interesting when you go back and look at your early work, and you start to see things with different eyes. And often, I mean, when I'm editing, I use Chinograph, so I never rub out my editing process, and so I go back and I look at my original edit marks and see the Chinograph marks, and often I actually see photos that I've completely missed, because when I first looked at that work when I was younger, I didn't have the experience or the knowledge or the eye to realize that, in fact, some of the photos that I completely misplaced or didn't sort of mark up were in fact really good photos. And so it's interesting in that process to go and see that work with new eyes and just discover, actually, Jesus, why didn't I mark that one up? That's really interesting. And often they're kind of more haphazard, kind of fluid, kind of imperfect kind of photos, which I have become to really appreciate. And Fucked Up Photos takes imperfection to a whole other level. And while I was going through this process, I started to see, I shoot on Leicas, so a lot of my I have a 0 frame, and then I have like half frames, and then often with a Leica you can kind of accidentally double expose when your spool doesn't wind on, or in the situation of opening up the back of the film by accident, the camera, when you forgot the film's in there. I mean, I've done all these mistakes that we all do over the years, and I built up this archive of kind of fuck ups, I guess. So I started to see these images that I originally just sort of, didn't even think about looking at. And I looked at them carefully and started to see something really quite beautiful and artistic and surreal. And it was a whole different way of looking at my photography, obviously, particularly the double exposures. And I thought, wow, there's something really interesting here. And so that encouraged me to go through every single contact sheet. And so I did over many months and came up with a very large collection. And then I edited it down because I felt like I had something. I had a project here. I had a book. And that's how the book came about. I mean, it really came about from this editing process. And the photos range from double exposures to light leaks, chemical emulsion spills, X-ray damage. In the case of a trip I did to Israel once during the Intifada, where the Israeli security forces intentionally X-rayed my films 10 times in 3 different machines.
Oh, no.
and managed to destroy pretty much half of the film. But the film that did survive had such bad X-ray damage that initially I was just devastated. But then when this project came about, I thought, well, hang on, this is really interesting, and they're quite beautiful, and they had this really strange fog and grain. And so some of those photos are in the book, of course, and then, you know, reticulation, which is something that happens during a processing of a film, where the chemicals are too hot and it cracks the film, and you end up with this incredible mosaic-looking image that they kind of look like maggots if you look closely at it. Oh, yes. And one of the photos in Ballarat you might have seen of the crew shooter had that reticulation.
Yes. I was wondering what that was. Yeah, it looks awesome. Yeah. in a beautiful sense, yeah.
It made me appreciate the imperfection of photography a lot more, and it made me actually analyze my own work and my own vision to the point where I was questioning what makes a good photograph. You know, like I've spent my whole life trying to make perfect photos, and here's something that challenges that. And I thought, you know, mate, I'm not saying it's my best work by any means, but it's certainly the most unique and certainly the most adventurous that I've done. And I thought, this is something that I would like people to see. I'd like the world to see. I'm not afraid to show contact sheets or how that process comes about. Some photographers are, but I'm happy to share that. And it was looking at that beauty and that real kind of strange thing where you start to see a story within the photo, a different kind of story because of the elements of what's happening. And it was really exciting, you know.
I think it's amazing, Stephen, that you've been able to produce a potential book from your fuck ups. Most of us are just trying to get enough photographs together to produce something half decent. And you've gone, well, you know, through COVID, I just thought, what am I going to do? I'll go through all my shit photos and oh my God, I've got a wonderful project and a book here. And everyone's going, what a master, well done. But I think it's important. It's right what you said. Yeah. We go out as photographers trying to make sure everything's in focus and nothing has grain and all of this stuff. Exposure's perfectly correct and blah, 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 and everything's stopped in time and everything's sharp. It doesn't really matter. That doesn't really always add to the story. It's our own perfection going into it, isn't it, really? Well, that stops us from choosing a potential.
Absolutely. And I just want to emphasize that every single photograph I chose was unintentional. So I never sought to create that image. It was all accidental. And when I write about it in my book, I write this essay to explain, and I sort of say, well, in fact, I didn't really take these photos. I mean, I clicked the shutter, but because it was not my intention and I didn't know what was going to happen, that it was created by other means, you know, often my own negligence, or in the case of going to Israel, censorship, you know. So, you know, these things were, that for me was really interesting, that it wasn't my intention and they're not really 100% my images if I'm making myself clear enough in that it's, yes, I'm the author, but did I make them? Yes, I did, but I didn't really create them that way. They were created by science or by accidents and things like that, chance, and, you know, and I think that's also what photography is too. I mean, when we go out on the street, we make these photographs, everything is by chance or by accident or by luck or so forth. And, you know, when I took it to Steidl, I didn't know if he'd like it or not. You know, I mean, Gerhardt's a pretty out there guy, and if he likes something, it's great because he'll publish it. But I thought he might think it was shit. I mean, I had no idea. I liked it, and I was lucky because he really did like it. He and I think he saw something in it as well, and he immediately said, "Yeah, let's publish it." This is really great. So that was exciting. Just frustrating to wait for it to come out, but look, it will come out. Just in good time.
Patience, Stephen. Patience.
Well, I can't wait.
You've got to be patient with Gerhardt.
I can't wait to see it, Stephen. It's going to be amazing. And speaking of photos that aren't 100% yours that are created by science, I also saw your work at the Bowness Prize where you were a finalist. And on the placard describing your photograph, it says this photograph was created with a camera, not the use of AI. And it's funny that you have to say that these days in a photography competition.
Well, it's mad.
Yeah.
I mean, it's mad that it's come to this, but it has. And I've just seen so many AI images and also questionable photos that are not clarified as AI, people trying to get away with photography using AI. And I just thought, I've got to make a statement here. I've got to say that this is actually a real photo. I took this photo and I didn't create it, through artificial intelligence. And it's a sad time to have to but I guess that is the time we are in, and it's only going to get worse. With technologies and with what AI is doing. I mean, but I stick to, my feelings of photography is very strong in that, I think it's really important that you are the author, not from, I don't think AI allows you to be an author of something because you're using intelligence gathered from so many sources that is not your property. I don't know how people can justify it. I really don't.
Do you think do you think AI is going to replace photography? Like, you're a photojournalist, and the way the technology's moved in the last 8 months to a year has been phenomenal from where it started, and the quality of the images that they can produce. They don't even have to send people like yourself to the war zone anymore. They can just create their own narrative. Do you think that's like I'm being too Orwellian, or?
That's a devastating thought.
It's a devastating thought, but you're not too far from the truth. I mean, look, we're seeing it now. We're only seeing it maybe in a small way, but it's only going to get worse, without question. Will it take over photography? I don't think it will. I think there'll always be photographers who appreciate the art of taking photos and, the challenge and risks and all of those things involved in being a photographer. I think the issue is you're now competing with AI.
Yeah.
And you're not just competing with other photographers anymore. And that's scary. And I think where it'll hurt most is in the advertising industry and the fashion industry. They'll probably go first because they're commonly notorious in manipulation anyway. Yeah. So when they see something that can make a beauty product, a model, even better by using AI, I mean, shit, they're going to do it. There's no stopping it. So advertising, commercials, why not? They're going to do it too. It's going to save them on paying photographers, isn't it? So, it's going to be a cost-effective thing. Where it comes to, the important thing is street photography and documentary photography. What it does to that is anyone's question, because yes, it will have an impact, but hopefully there'll always be people asking questions and saying that this is real or this is not real. And with the situation that we're dealing with right now in Gaza, for example, you need to be looking at authentic imagery. Sadly, there's so much coming out, you don't know what is authentic or not.
Exactly.
But within the context of that, there will be photographers' names that come up that you trust, and you will go, okay, I know that photographer's work, and I know that person works for the New York Times or whatever. I'm going to trust that this is real. So I think you got to read between. It just becomes like a lot more digging to find out, it's a bit like digging through Instagram to find out really good photos, because there's so much rubbish, so it's wonderful when you come across these, great photos, but you got to dig, you got to mine for them, in order to find the gold.
That's right. You do find the little nuggets. Now,
Find
Stephen,
the nuggets, it's just you got to trawl through all the all the sewage, and finally you kind of move the turds away and you find a piece of gold down in the sewer pipe. It's great. It's a wonderful thing. I mean, it still excites me. I mean, photography is really exciting when you see great work. And what I love about what you guys are doing is that you're coming from a street photography thing. And that, like I said, I think at the beginning of the podcast, I said, it's really at the heart of what I do and what I love. And with street photography, there's nowhere really to go except for to be on the street, with the rhythm of the street and dance with the people and make these photographs that are completely unique and spontaneous. And hopefully AI won't take that away.
Hopefully it won't. But Steve, you've just segued perfectly into my next question.
Oh, yeah. Okay, good.
It's like this was rehearsed, but it wasn't. It's been amazing. It's great. Right. So you've just spoken, you've said that, we've spoken about your photojournalism quite a lot, and you've also said that your photography always starts on the street, even to a part where your photojournalism. But Little Birdie has told us that you have a shit-hot collection of actual street photos of your own that you don't show anyone, that you keep to yourself.
Well,
is this Little Birdie true, or are we just making this up? Is this like an exclusive, Stephen? Or
you'll have to wait and see. It'll be like fucked up photos. I'll come out with a project, and absolutely, no question. I mean, I have an archive of street photography that I haven't really shown.
Wow.
And I have people nudging me to do something with it, and I should, and I will. Like anything, I just don't like to do anything unless I'm ready, and I really feel that although I feel like I could do something, I'm just trying to finish off other projects, and then I will get on to I would love to do something like that, because maybe it's I'm not going to kind of preempt anything, but I would, if I was to do something like that, it would be my most personal work, and I think it would be my best work, Wow. So it will be something to look forward to, I hope. Because it really is exciting to look at that and go, wow, because that is, like I said, it's at the heart of what I do. I mean, I took up photography because I was inspired by a lot of these people who were either street photographers or serious documentary photographers that believed in the moment, believed in capturing the moment,
Well, I don't know. I think both Mark and myself are really, really like talk to the fella in Germany.
Who told you that?
We don't
get hard.
No, I don't want to know.
Don't
give away your sources. No, it's okay.
No,
but I better get editing and
no pressure.
Photos,
Now we always have one like very cliched question that we ask Stephen, but we do it after every chat and conversation that we have with somebody, and this is it. Are you ready?
Ready.
Is it the same question you ask everyone, or is it
exactly, Stephen? That's it. Yep.
Well,
if you could go anywhere in the world, where would you go to photograph? And why? And please don't pick a war zone, because it mentioned Israel before. All right, so don't say Israel. Right? I already got you. I did a preempted strike. So not Israel. Right? Somewhere else.
God.
Got you on the spot now, haven't I?
No, I could say the moon would be interesting if I could get up there. But there wouldn't be much. Well, we don't know. Because there wouldn't be any people up there. It'd just be kind of craters and stuff, But it'd be interesting. No, honestly, I think I would have to say Iran.
Yep.
Wow. I know that's kind of boring, but Iran is a country that I have been wanting to go to pretty much my whole life. I attempted once and they wouldn't let me in. I tried to cross over once from Turkey, and I got turned back at the border. I would desperately like to go to Iran, and the reason I want to go to Iran is because I just think it must be one of the most extraordinarily beautiful countries, and culturally. I think it's also connected to Afghanistan for me, because I spent so much time in Afghanistan, right on the Iranian border, and their history and culture blends in. And Iran is really the pinnacle of Persia, and goes back to my ancient history kind of infatuation back at school, and even now that I'm just fascinated with the Persian Empire, and I would just deeply love to explore Iran just from a personal point of view. Also politically, I think what's happening in Iran, or has been for a time, and because it's closed off to most of the world, it's really distressing to see what they're doing with women over there, and how they're preventing people from demonstrating, and also just that sort of incarceration of women's rights and the youth. I just think Iran would be really fascinating, and I think a place to take street photography for sure.
Absolutely. And
I haven't been there, and hopefully I'll get there one day.
And everyone I've spoken to just says, the people are so welcoming and so lovely, and they're just run by this, maniac religious administration.
Yeah,
So
I know.
And, you're right. They've sort of got this wave of women's emancipation, and someone like yourself, it'd be amazing to go and do stories there. Absolutely. That'd be fantastic.
Yeah, one day, hopefully. Yeah, love to.
And I've met a couple of Iranian people here, photographers that I'm friends with. And also I work in the university system, and I have a lot of access to people from Iran. They're absolutely beautiful people.
I know they are.
Really beautiful.
They really are.
Really,
it's just
lovely, lovely people.
It's just the Ayatollahs,
Yeah, that's
right. We could talk. It's always religion, mate. You know what I mean? Like,
always religion.
The Italians were beautiful as well, and so that's a different story. Let's not go there.
We better not go there. We might have a call from the Pope, so we better leave it at that.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for talking to us, Stephen. It has been an absolute pleasure, and to listen to your journey and your stories. Yeah. Thanks so much for your time. I speak on behalf of Mark and myself.
It's been amazing. Stephen, thank you so much.
Thank you, John. Really appreciate you having me on the program, mate. Thanks, guys.
All the best.
All right. See ya.
See ya.